Did you know if you're a farmer, you can get your low tunnels paid for by the NRCS? Through a recently launched government program, farmers can get between $4 and $5 per square foot in reimbursement towards a Quick Hoops low tunnel system. That's free money to help increase production on your farm. Learn more about Quick Hoops and the NRCS program at shop.moderngrower.co or using the link below. And with as little as we do know about the soil, one thing you mentioned is, hey, we don't want to ruin the soil. We could ruin the soil. And people want to do things like take biochar and let just stuff into the soil to put carbon down there. From just a macro perspective, not getting into biochar specifically, but is there a danger of trying to do too much to sequester carbon into the soil where we foul things up? Or does the soil have the potential to sequester the carbon that we want it to?
There are several starting points into that conversation. One is we have already lost quite a lot of organic carbon due to human activities over the last few hundred and thousands of years. By some estimates, it's 130 petagrams or gigatons that we have lost collectively from soils. That is quite a bit of carbon. So one could assume that just putting in what we've lost over the last few hundred to last few thousand years shouldn't do any harm because it was there in the first place and we caused it to go away.
So say we start adding organic matter back to the soil, bringing it up to levels where it was in the past. Let's say we put organic matter into the soil, compost, manures, biochar, what have you. We can also assume that as we add that food source, microbial count populations will expand because they now have more to eat. One thought and one thing I've heard is the more microbes you have in the soil, the more CO2 that's being emitted. Is that a linear relationship? So if you double the microbial population in the soils, there's carbon in that body mass of all those microbes, but they're also emitting CO2. Does the lockup in the body mass outweigh the offset of CO2 from their digestion?
Now that's a good question, and that's you're putting your finger on a very important research questions right there, because of course activity and presence is not the same thing. You can have a very large community, but they're not eating a lot. They're just hanging in there. And especially microorganisms are known for, they can be dormant, not do much, but reactivate, some of them more than others, reactivate if conditions are better for them to do what they want to do or need to do to reproduce. Or there can be very few microorganisms, but they do a lot. And to conclude from presence, a lot or very few, to activity, a lot of CO2, less CO2, is not straightforward and in general not the case. Of course, the highest activity you only get if you have a high amount of live microorganisms, but the opposite is already not true. You can have almost no activity with a lot of microorganisms. For instance, an example is in a freezer. And if it's very cold, you can have a lot of microorganisms and they do nothing. And so it depends very much on the conditions. And since we are moving towards the insight that the majority of soil organic matter is actually a remain of a microorganism or the microbial population, the ability and the ability of the microbial population to build body mass and to assimilate, to eat leaves is the very mechanism by which organic matter is built up. And a current statement that probably most would subscribe is that the majority of soil organic matter is microbial necromass. So that is how much a microorganism is producing CO2 versus multiplying or building more body mass and doing other things with the carbon than making CO2 is a big question. Can we manipulate that? Do we want to manipulate that for making more microbial necromass rather than more CO2? And would that be through more microorganisms or more active microorganisms, more turning over microorganisms? What is the trick here if there is one? And so that is a very interesting question to ask. And I don't have an answer.
And I don't know if this is in your field of study or not, but that example we talked about, that could have been in a fallow field where exhaust is just going up into the sky. But if that's in a planted field, you have now a plant above it. So the plant is catching CO2 coming out of the soil. It's pulling it from the atmosphere, and it's producing, using some of that carbon to make its body mass, and it's putting a lot of that carbon back into the soil to feed the microbes. In that model there, where you have plant, microbes, cycling carbon, I don't know if, or do you have a sense, if science knows, how much carbon leaks out of that chain? Meaning the plant doesn't catch that CO2, it's up into the atmosphere to be used at a later day.
Yeah, no, there's quite a bit of CO2 that goes into the atmosphere. And yes, the CO2 concentrations near the soil surface and especially in the soil are quite a bit higher than in above the vegetation. And there's a clear gradient of CO2 concentrations from in the soil upwards. And that is actually now the way landscape scale carbon dioxide emissions are calculated, with large towers that measure CO2 at the soil surface and then up to 50 or 100 meters on these towers. And that gradient of CO2 with other atmospheric properties are used to calculate how much CO2 is coming up. And of course, about half the CO2 that comes out of the soil or out of the ecosystem, half of that is from the soil, and the other half is from the plants themselves, because they respire as well carbon dioxide. And they do that at different times of the day, whereas the soils are doing it practically day and night, granted with some differences that it's usually different temperatures at night than during the day. But for plants, of course, there's a big difference, because during sun hours, they're doing different metabolism, photosynthesis, than during the night. And that changes the CO2 exchange quite dramatically. So there's a lot going on in terms of who is producing carbon dioxide and who is taking it up. But the plants are only taking up during the day when they're doing photosynthesis, and the soils are also producing it during the night, because they don't care whether it's day or night.
Hello, growers. If you enjoy podcasts like this one, tune into my podcast In Search of Soil on YouTube for a deep dive into the mysteries beneath our feet. Join me as I explore topics such as mycorrhizal fungi, mushrooms, compost, biochar, and more. It's a soil nerd's dream. We're going deep. We're talking to scientists about all things soil related. Whether you're a seasoned farmer or a gardener just starting out, our podcast has something for everyone. Listen in and grow with us. Check out In Search of Soil on YouTube.